I am Joshua, DAE, a 300 level law student from the University of Lagos.
Hi, my name is Joshua and Enitan. I'm an international student recruitment officer.
Oh, that's good. So we'll be discussing intention to create legal relations. And to begin with, it is important to state that intention to create legal relations is one of the vital elements of a contract. Now you ask me, what is a contract? Contract is an agreement between two parties where there is offer, acceptance, intention to create legal relations, capacity to contract, and consideration. But here we are only talking about intention to create legal relations. Now, why do you think the law requires that there must be intention to create legal relations before we can have a binding contract? Can you make a suggestion?
So why do I think? Can you ask again?
Yeah, why do you think that the law requires that you must have intention to create legal relations before the contract will be binding on you? When I say binding, I mean that before you can be taken to court in order for that contract to be enforced.
Well, if I consider it in layman's terms from what you said, so that I must also an intention. So I must also be aware that there's a legal situation on ground.
Exactly. Because if there's absence of intention to create legal relations, you would not be able to go to court to enforce your rights under such a contract.
Okay.
So, and this brings to the fore the classification of intention to create legal relations. The first classification is social and domestic agreements. Social and domestic agreements. Now, the rule relating to social and domestic agreements states that there is no intention to create legally binding agreements between parties in a social or domestic context. Do you get? And I will explain why. In a social gathering, seldom would you find a person who would want to be visited by legal consequences when they don't abide by their promises. I would explain that. For example, when you are called upon to come for the show, if you disregard our call, we can't sue you because it's what? A social agreement, right? So also, if your daddy makes a promise that he's going to pay your school fees, if he doesn't pay, will you for that reason go to court and sue him for non-payment of your school fees? Have you ever done so before?
You never know.
But do you think the court would enforce such an agreement between your father and you concerning the payment of your school fees?
Would that be because of our relationship, or would that be because it was not in?
Okay, let me ask you, how many promises does your father make to you on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis?
Yeah, so that's why I asked. So the reason why it doesn't stand, would that be because he's my father?
Yeah, I'm actually replying your question with a question, and I would like that you answer it before I proceed to answer your question.
Why don't you think I would like you to answer my question?
Well, the point is because of the nature of the relationship.
Okay.
You know, many promises spring up from domestic context. For example, your dad can promise your mom that when I'm coming back, I'll buy this, I'll buy that, or call me, I'll make a transfer at 2 p.m. Most of the time, your father may not keep these promises. Do you understand? And if each of this non-fulfillment of promises is taken to court, it's going to flood the court room with vexatious litigations that are not serious in nature. Do you understand? These are things you can talk out between yourself, right, as a family. Do you understand? That doesn't require any form of legal intervention to resolve. And that is why the rule stands that, generally speaking, social and domestic agreements are not binding in law. So you cannot sue your father for failure to pay your school fees. So also you cannot sue your friends if they say they will attend your birthday party and they refuse to come. It is because of the nature of the relationship. Another classification of intention to create legal relations is commercial agreements. So, in order to ensure that you actually got what I'm saying, what is the first classification of intention to pre-legal relations?
Social and domestic.
And what is the rule relating to social and domestic agreements?
Agreement. So what's it relating to?
The rule relating to social and domestic agreements.
Do I have to state?
Then you could, yeah.
Well,
you can...
that agreements made in a social or domestic situations will not hold. So in situations such as you and your father, the example that you used, or in situations with my friends, if it's in a social place or maybe social relationship, then such litigation, I don't know if that word is correct, will not hold in court of law.
So it is also important for me to add that there's an exception to that rule. Because you're wondering that how come, why won't I be able to sue my father? Why won't my mother be able to sue my father who is a husband, right? Yeah, there's actually an exception where they are about to separate or where they have separated. Do you understand? So if the wife and the husband are about to separate, or if they have already separated, the law will presume that there's intention to create legal relations between them if they make any promise. So I'll give you a case study. In a particular case, the husband and wife were about to separate because the husband went to live with another woman. And so he promised that the house they were living in that was subject to a mortgage agreement. You know what a mortgage agreement is? They borrowed money and they used the house as a collateral security. That if she pays off, because he said he was going to be sending allowances to her at month end, you get. So if she can pay off and offset the mortgage fee, she will become the owner of the house. You see, they had an arrangement. So after she paid off, the husband did not want her to have the house as promised. But the court ruled that there was actually intention to create legal relations because they were on the verge of what? Separating. So commercial agreement is a second classification of intention to create legal relations. And the rule relating to commercial agreements is that there is generally an intention to create binding legal relations. And the reason is not hard to seek. This is because in the commercial setting, we know that everything has to do with exchange of goods and services for money and so on. So the law presumes that in a commercial setting, parties intend to create legal relations. However, there's an exception to this rule. And one of the exceptions is mere puff. Mere puff. Can you say that?
Mere puff.
Yeah, mere puff. Mere puff is a statement you make, but you don't mean it. Do you understand? It's a statement you make, but you don't mean it. And in order for you to understand this, I would also give you a case scenario. So in a particular case, the person who sued, that is the person who went to court, was wanted to enter into a marriage with a very beautiful woman, and then the father of the woman or the girl called him to their house in order for them to exchange, rings and all of those. So the father then promised him that if he should marry our daughter, whom he was already engaged with, that he was going to pay her £100 at month and like every month. Do you get it? So the father refused to keep that promise, although the guy married his daughter. So in that situation, the court said that there was no intention to create legal relations because the statement he made was what? A mere puff. Do you understand?
That's a
You don't get it. Do you get it?
I do.
Can you explain?
From what you just said?
Yeah, from what I said.
Okay. So in this sort of situation, the father or the father-in-law is merely making a statement and can decide not to keep it because there was no intention to create legal relations.
And besides, as the court said, it amounts to words spoken to excite potential suitors. Besides, they were already engaged, so he would still have proceeded to marry her without the promise of getting money at the end of the month. Then look at this very interesting one. You've seen Milo adverts. Oh, drink Milo, you have muscles, and I've been drinking Milo. Can you see any muscles there?
But I think you can sue in that situation.
You cannot. It's actually mere puff. That's the legal implication.
Well, I would say that there's an exception to that, because I think in law there seems to be exception in everything.
Yeah.
We have seen situations where people have actually sued even like software companies and even adverts because they have sent the wrong message. I definitely have seen situations like that.
Well, if the message is actually misleading, per se, yeah, it could actually be a ground for people to sue them. But in most cases, you can't sue them on the ground that they posted an advert, describing their product in grand and superlative terms. For example, Milo will say, if you keep drinking Milo, you have muscles, you will be a champion, you will score 100 goals within some minutes. Is that possible?
No, but should.
But you cannot sue them for that.
But I think you can.
Because it's mere pop.
I think you can.
It's so that you can buy Milo.
I think you can.
Why?
Let's continue.
But it falls under mere pop.
Okay.
Whenever you see an advert that doesn't look real, like every reasonable person would know that if you buy Milo and you consume it like consistently, you cannot score 100 goals in a minute, right? And not everyone that drinks Milo can be said to be a champion. Do you understand? So let's summarize our points. So intention to create legal relations, as I said earlier, actually falls under one of the elements of a binding contract. And the reason why the law requires intention to create legal relations is because even the devil does not know the intentions of men. So most of the time, people will state that this is what they mean and that is not what they mean, you get. And so in order to further clarify the point, there are now different categories of intention to create legal relations. And we started with social and domestic agreements. And the general principle is that there is no intention to create legal relations. Why? Because of the nature of the relationship. But an exception to that rule is where the husband and the wife are about to separate. Then for commercial agreements, because of the nature of the transaction, people want to pay for goods and services and get things done on time. So the law presumes that there is intention to create legal relations. While mere pop that you've been contending on, like you don't really agree with that part of you. I actually agree with it.
Yeah, it was just the ad part, but that's fine.
Oh, no, I'm not saying that for ad. For example, if Jumia or Gigi posts like a red shoe and then they supply black shoe, that is not mere pop. They can be liable for what they've done. That is misrepresentation, and it also constitutes a situation where you breach the Sales of Goods Act that says that the goods you sell must match the description when it is sold by sample, right? But in cases of Milo, Bonfita, they are just trying to draw customers, right? For example, we say Sensei produces over 1,000 video sessions per month. We know that it cannot by any stretch of the imagination be real, right? So we just want people to come and watch our videos.
Okay.
Yeah. So do you have any question?
No, not at all.
Oh, all right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, hello. Yes, I did. It's a very good. Bring it down. Okay, so from what I learned, I think first we have to establish when this agreement was made or when this promise was made. So was this during their separation? So because the exception to the social and domestic agreement was if it was made during, maybe a marital separation from while they were married. So if this was while they were married and while they were together and was just a child of, it could be a mere bluff or buff. I think it's mere puff.
Type of puff.
Oh, so it could be mere puff. But I think that if there is any evidence that maybe a recorded, this is outside what my stuff of course. So if there is an evidence of what he has said, maybe it was written, but I'm sure it wasn't written because it was just a chair hop, or it was recorded, then maybe there will be something to hold on to. But this could just be a mere off because they were married, happily married at the time. So yes.